lights went out in Ash Hollow, and the eyes appeared. The lights went out in Ash Hollow, and the eyes appeared. It began like any neighborhood outage. A bulb popped, a neighbor cursed, an appliance let go midwhir. Mara Hemsley paused in the kitchen with a spoon in her hand, and something like a thought that would not leave her go look. She pulled her coat on over the shoulders that had grown used to small, private anxieties, and stepped into a street where every window held a pale, deliberate blink, as if the town itself had traded lamps for watchers. Neighbors' porches were filled with the hush of breath and whispered questions. People stood with cups of tea frozen half-raised, faces lit from inside by reflections that were not theirs. The eyes were no one's pupils exactly. They sat like paper moons in reflections, in spoons, in a bucket of rainwater on a stoop. They watched with patient curiosity, unflickering and oddly intimate, as though they had been waiting for someone to notice that the light had gone and something else had come in its place. Mara moved down the lane, boots making a soft, solitary rhythm on the wet cobbles. Her breath fogged, her hands dug into the pockets of her coat and found, by habit, the place where she kept small things. Instead, she found a note on her neighbor's stoop, a torn corner of ledger paper, creased and ink-smeared. Who looks keeps. The handwriting looped like the sea, and under it, a date that felt like a hinge. It was the sort of script you found in town books, the kind that added weight to rumor. People at the corner, Green spoke at low volume, as if the wrong syllable might wake something farther than they expected. Old Mrs. Langley, who never left her chair, clutched a blanket and stared at the puddle near her feet where two eyes circled like trapped fish. Her voice, when it came, was small. They remember faces now. Mara asked what that meant, and was answered by the hollow, polite shrug of a town that protects itself by answering with no single truth. The ledger paper crinkled in her pocket like a promise. She went home and could not shake the look of the eyes in still surfaces. At the kitchen sink, she saw one nested in the curve of her teacup, not reflecting the room, but holding something like a memory, a winter market, a laugh, a street lamp failing. The idea lodged with a firmness that made her breath catch. The eyes were not mere mirrors, they conserved moments. Whoever had put them there had found a way to harvest attention and make it solid. That night, she opened the old ledger. It had once been on the town hall shelf like a fossil, names listed with dates, and a column of margins full of shorthand. Leave a light, leave watch, leave witness. Her fingers traced a line where a name repeated across years, then stopped where a gap yawned open, and someone had written, "Do not wake them." The pages smelled faintly of smoke and old rain. She lifted the ledger to the lamp and felt the eyes in the room press forward, curious about the paper as if it were a key. In the ledger's margin, a map had been sketched, the hollow house at the edge of town, its pathways marked with crosses, and a single circled door. Mara realized the brass key her grandmother had given her years ago, kept as a trinket, was no heirloom but an answer. It sat in her coat pocket, heavy and waiting. The town had a way of giving you what you needed to obey its rules, or to break them, and the key had the slim weight of a question dangling from a string. The hollow house leaned like a tired thing at the edge of the map's ink. The path there was flanked by hedges that breathed in the lightless air. As she approached the boarded porch, the eyes increased, not frantic, but concentrated, as if an assembly had clustered around a stage to see how the next act would begin. The key turned in the door with a smoothness that felt too obliging. The house exhaled and let her in, and the interior swallowed the sound of the street like a mouth closing. Inside, air moved as if the house remembered every step ever taken across its floors. Portraits lined the walls, but their glass did not merely reflect Mara. It held little luminous orbs like watchful fruit. When she brushed dust from a frame, she saw a memory unspool, a child running a kite between the sycamores, laughter that had no owner now. The eyes did not judge, they collected without malice. Yet being collected felt like losing something, a ledger entry becoming ink instead of voice. She found a small room past the parlor, where the floorboards settled into grooves like old hands. On a makeshift altar lay names carved into splintered wood, tiny things arranged like offerings. Each had an accompanying eye in a nearby glass, a spoon, a watch crystal, a button polished till it gleamed. Mara read the etched names aloud and felt, with each syllable, a slight tightening around her ribs, as if someone elsewhere were tuning an instrument and she had stepped into the measure. The ledger's note meant something precise. There was no ceremony here that demanded blood. The arrangement existed to keep things speaking. Names, small moments, conversations that otherwise would fall silent. The eyes seemed a neutral technology of preservation, but neutral can be cruel in its completeness. They kept not just faces, but habits. The way someone flipped a page, a laugh that always began at the same word. Mara realized with a hollow astonishment that to be an object in this room was to become forever available to the gaze of others, an exhibit of private life. She tried to leave and found that the house did not want her to march the way she had arrived. The door would open, then close as if testing patience. When she put her hand to the knob, the eyes in the hallway pooled and brightened, as if taking stock. One of the glass watch crystals, cut thicker than the rest, caught her reflection and held it, almost reverently. She saw the ledger's margins unfold across her face, the dates and admonitions superimposed like a history she had not yet lived. Outside, Ash Hollow had not gone back to normal. The street lamp near the green threw a thin cone, and the puddles held constellations of eyes. People moved as if remembering conversations they had not quite had. Somewhere, a radio clicked off mid-sentence and never came on again. Mara understood at a level that made her stomach drop. Attention in Ash Hollow had become a currency and a custody. The ledger recorded those who had consented and those who had not, and the margin marked what to do with the unconsenting. She returned the ledger to the town hall shelf with shaking hands. The book fit like a slice into a groove. Someone had made space just for it. The clerk regarded her with the small, tired politeness of those accustomed to heavy things. "They keep what you give them," he said, not unkindly. "And sometimes they take what is left behind." Mara went home, keys jangling in an odd rhythm, and realized the brass key had warmed where her heart knocked against it. She had given attention. The eyes had accepted. That night, when the lights were finally supposed to return and the street lamps mustered their old courage, Mara stood at her window and watched the eyes watch quiet things, the kettle, the clock, the pictures on a neighbor's wall. She pressed her palms to the glass and saw, not for the first time, that her reflection wore a ledger page like a shawl. The town had not only learned to keep vigil, it had learned to wear the past like clothing. She wondered, as the first filament sputtered back to life, whether her own face would be stitched into someone else's book. In the morning, life was not wholly the life it had been. People greeted each other with an extra careful amplitude, as if testing whether they were still allowed to have private corners. The ledger remained on its shelf, patient. Sometimes Mara thought she felt the warmth of the brass key as an answering pulse against her pocket. She told herself that the eyes belonged to memory and nothing more, that towns keep strange collections, and that strange collections do not always mean harm. But at night, when the lamp died, and the eyes gathered like audience members resitting their seats, she could not help but feel watched by a kindness that kept no secrets. She learned to leave small things, trinkets, a scrap of music, a phrase she wanted remembered, on her windowsill for the eyes. They collected them as one might return a note to a safe place. Sometimes, late and brittle with the cold, she imagined the eyes sharing those scraps with one another, rearranging moments into a mosaic that let the town sleep. The ledger's admonition remained: do not wake them. Mara kept her voice soft, and sometimes in the hush she heard, beneath the breathing of houses, a slow, almost contented murmur moving from window to window. On a rain-heavy evening long after the first night, a new light failed, and this time the eyes in the puddles swelled and clustered, until the street itself resembled a constellation on its knees. Mara stood where she had always stood, and for the first time felt as if the watchers leaned in not to hold her life, but to offer her one back, a question shaped like a doorway. She slipped the brass key from her pocket, and with a steadiness she hadn't known she possessed, walked toward it. The house at the edge of town opened, and the eyes inside unfurled like pages waiting to be read. What she found within was neither punishment nor blessing, but an arrangement of attention, a library in which the town had catalogued itself. Names were not stolen so much as archived, moments preserved as a people might preserve vocabulary after a language changes. Mara understood, finally, that the ledger and the eyes were methods of staying human when hunger came, a way of making sure faces did not dissolve into rumor. The last line of the ledger's margin read, like an invitation and a warning both, and Mara closed the book with a thought that would stay with her long afterward. Some watching is of care, some of keeping. Years later, when the street lamp by the green failed again, and a new face moved through Ash Hollow wondering why the town felt so visible, Mara would be the one who met them with a small, patient smile. She would hand them a brass key with the weight of a question, and a ledger with a single margin note already begun in a cramped, familiar hand. The eyes would gather and tilt toward the newcomer, not as hunters, but as hosts. The town kept watch. It had always been a town that could not bear forgetting. The rest, as with all lasting mysteries, remained in the margins.